A retired Navy SEAL's German Shepherd stood motionless in a quiet, snowy yard. His breath trembled in the cold, ignoring the toy his owner tossed to lift his spirits. He wasn't supposed to be on duty anymore. He was meant to rest, to heal. But just beyond the fence, hidden beneath winter frost, two little girls lay silent in an underground pit, starving, freezing, waiting for a miracle that never came. No one heard their cries. No one knew they were there. Except this dog. He smelled their terror. He sensed the darkness. He remembered the scent of danger from a past life he thought was over. What he did next will make you question what truly endures longer, human cruelty or a dog's unwavering loyalty. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. A pale winter dusk pressed against the snowy roofs of suburban Denver, its cold light settling over everything like a held breath refusing to exhale. Ethan Cole moved through that stillness as if he were a ghost trapped between worlds. He was 37, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by years of sand, sea, and shadow. His jawline was square but softened by exhaustion, his short, dark blonde hair in need of a cut, and a faint line across his left brow, an old shrapnel scar, hinted at battles he had survived but never truly left behind. His eyes, once sharp and decisively blue, now held the muted color of storm water, unfocused, wandering, hollow. They were the eyes of a man who used to know exactly who he was, until life shifted and left him without coordinates. Just 2 months earlier, he had been a Navy SEAL team leader, disciplined, relentless, the kind of man who absorbed pressure like bone absorbs marrow. But one mission, just one, had unraveled years of calculation and brotherhood. He had lost his closest teammate, Tyler Briggs, a man built like a fortress with a laugh too large for combat zones. The guilt of that failure was a weight Ethan secretly believed he deserved. Now, discharged early for psychological recovery, he lived alone in a small, weathered house on Birchwood Lane, where the walls felt too thin to contain the memories he carried. Silence had become his unwelcome roommate. And in that silence, the ticking clock on the kitchen wall counted his failures with infuriating precision. The only living thing that still pulled him into the present was Ranger. Ranger was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, large and powerfully built, with a black saddle of fur across his back and rich tan along his legs and muzzle. His eyes were amber, clear, aware, and intelligent. He was the kind of dog that made strangers step aside and children stare in awe. Ranger had once trained with military canine handlers, specializing in detection and tactical search, but Ethan had adopted him after a minor injury retired him from service. The injury, a thin scar running along his right shoulder, never slowed him down. If anything, it gave him an air of seasoned authority. Ranger was disciplined almost to the edge of eerie intuition. He moved like a soldier who still remembered the battlefield even after leaving it behind. He understood routines, understood emotions, and understood Ethan in ways no human seemed capable of. Normally, when winter days shortened and snow pressed against the windows, Ranger spent evenings curled beside the hearth, snoring lightly while Ethan nursed hot coffee and tried to forget how quiet a house could become when loss moved in. But that evening, something had changed. Ranger hadn't touched his bowl. He ignored the rubber tug toy Ethan tossed half-heartedly onto the rug. He didn't even lie near the fire. Instead, he went to the sliding glass door at the back of the house, the one that opened to a fenced yard. Buried beneath fresh snow, Ethan noticed the change in posture immediately. Ranger's ears were speared forward, rigid, his stance low but purposeful. The dog's breath puffed warm clouds against the glass, and every few seconds he huffed the air as if trying to separate a scent from the frozen night. "Ranger," Ethan murmured, tone low, wary. "Come on, buddy. Dinner first." Ranger didn't move. The muscles along his back tightened, a subtle tremor running through his frame. Ethan felt a faint pinch of unease beneath his ribs. He knew the signs. He'd seen similar tension in K-9 units right before they alerted on hidden explosives or enemy movement. Ranger wasn't just distracted. Something was wrong. Ethan stepped closer to the door and crouched beside his dog. "What is it, boy?" The yard seemed empty, just a blanket of white sculpted by the wind, the wooden fence standing stiff and quiet. Beyond that fence lived the Raymond family, though Ethan hardly knew them. He had seen them only twice. The husband, Daniel, a tall but timid-looking man with sandy hair and a slightly hunched posture as if life had pressed too hard on his shoulders, and the wife, Veronica, striking in a sharp, unsettling way, with pale skin, raven-black hair, and eyes as still as iced-over lakes. She had waved once with a smile that didn't match her eyes. Ethan had never trusted smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Ranger's sudden tension made that memory settle heavily in his mind. The dog pressed his nose harder against the glass, then let out a quiet rumble, not a growl, not yet, but the ghost of one. Ethan stood and slid open the door. A blast of cold rushed in, stinging his skin, but Ranger darted out immediately, paws sinking into snow with purposeful strides. The dog didn't run wildly like most dogs would. Instead, he traced the fence line, pacing back and forth, tail stiff, nostrils flaring. Ethan followed him into the yard, boots crunching through the snow. The cold bit through his jacket, but Ranger's urgency pulled him onward. "Ranger!" Ethan repeated more sharply. "Report!" Ranger froze for a second, the familiar command reaching through the panic, then lowered his head and sniffed the ground near the fence with sharp, deliberate breaths. He whined, a sound low and frustrated, and scraped at the snow with one paw until the ice gave way and dark earth showed beneath. Ethan squatted, brushing snow aside. Nothing seemed unusual. No animal tracks, no disturbed soil, no sign of a predator or rodent. But the tension in Ranger's body told another story. Ethan trusted that story more than any visual evidence. "Easy," Ethan murmured, placing a steady hand on Ranger's back. The dog's muscles fluttered beneath his palm. "Whatever it is, we'll check it out tomorrow, okay?" But Ranger didn't settle. As the wind cut across the yard, he pressed his body against the fence and stared through the narrow gap between slats, breathing hard as if the air itself carried the whisper of something, or someone, hidden beneath the snow on the other side. Ethan stepped back, heart tightening with the old, unwelcome sensation of danger creeping along his nerves. He didn't know what Ranger sensed, but he knew with absolute certainty that the dog never misunderstood fear. And tonight, for the first time since Tyler's death, Ethan felt it too. The wind thickened over Denver's frozen suburb, sweeping sharp flakes across the street as Ethan Cole pulled his jacket tighter and stared at the gray house that had somehow become the center of Ranger's obsession. The dog stood beside him, body tense, tail still, the exact posture he had once taken before clearing a warehouse during a raid overseas. Something unseen pulled at Ranger's instincts with the same force as a command, and Ethan felt the echo of old battlefield adrenaline ripple under his skin. He stepped onto the Raymond's porch, where the thin layer of snow had not been brushed away in days, and knocked against the wooden door. Before the sound had fully settled, the door cracked open, and Veronica Raymond emerged from behind it like a shadow stepping out of a darker shadow. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender to the point of fragility, with porcelain-pale skin that contrasted sharply with her long black hair. It fell straight down her back like spilled ink. Her eyes, icy blue and still, were carefully emotionless, the kind of eyes belonging to someone who had practiced hiding their thoughts for years. She wore a soft gray sweater hanging too loosely from her shoulders, and her lips carried a forced curve of politeness that never warmed her face. The scent of her perfume, thick and sweet like artificial jasmine, clung to the cold air. "Oh, Ethan, right?" she said with a voice pitched a little too bright as if rehearsed. "Is everything okay?" Ethan watched her carefully, his training fitting every detail into an internal map of danger or safety. He didn't declare himself a SEAL, nor mention how Ranger had been alerting nonstop. "Sorry to bother you," he said, keeping his tone calm. "My dog's been behaving strangely. He keeps focusing on your backyard. I just wanted to check if you've seen any animals or anything unusual behind your house lately." Veronica blinked once, long and slow, as though choosing her expression with precision. "Animals? No, nothing at all. It's winter, Mr. Cole. Even the raccoons don't bother us anymore." Her smile tightened in a way that wasn't truly a smile. "If you smell something odd, I'm sure it's just old frozen food in our outdoor freezer. My husband keeps forgetting to unplug it." She let out a laugh that was too light, too controlled. Ethan's gaze flicked over her shoulder. The inside of the house was dim, curtains pulled shut, no movement, no sounds of a home being lived in, not even the hum of a television. Nothing, just a hollow stillness. He had lived in silence long enough to know when a place felt empty the wrong way. "Is Daniel home?" Ethan asked. Veronica's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly before she nodded. "He's resting. Long week at work." But her eyes slid toward the hallway behind her just for a heartbeat, betraying a flicker of something: fear, anger, or the calculation of what to say next. Before Ethan could respond, a voice drifted from deeper inside the house. A man's voice, thin, tired, barely audible. "Veronica, who's at the door?" Daniel Raymond appeared in the hallway like someone stepping out of a fog. He was in his early 40s, medium height but slightly stooped, with sandy hair beginning to gray at the temples. His face was narrow, the kind of face that looked permanently apologetic. A thin beard shadowed his jaw, not unkempt but neglected, as though he lacked the energy to care. His eyes, pale hazel and sunken, carried a dullness that came from years of surrender. To what, Ethan couldn't tell. "Oh," Daniel murmured when he saw Ethan. "Hello." His voice was hoarse, almost reluctant. Veronica moved quickly, too quickly to step between the two men. "Just the neighbor asking about animals in the yard," she said, her tone clipped. "Nothing to worry about." She placed a hand on the edge of the door, angled to close it. "If you don't mind, Ethan, dinner is burning." Ethan doubted anything was cooking, but she shut the door before he could say another word. The lock clicked sharply, a final punctuation. Ethan stood on the porch for a moment, letting the cold settle into him, letting his instincts speak. Something was wrong in that house. Wrong in a way he couldn't explain yet. Ranger, pacing at the base of the steps, let out a low growl when the porch light flicked off, plunging the doorway into shadow. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I feel it too." They walked back across the snowy yard, but Ranger's agitation didn't lessen. The dog kept glancing back at the Raymond's fence, his breaths short and sharp, fogging the air with urgency. Inside his own house, Ethan tried to push the encounter aside, but Ranger wouldn't allow it. The dog paced the living room, nails clicking, stopping only to stare at the back door as if waiting for Ethan to understand something he couldn't yet say. Ethan rubbed his forehead, exhaustion tugging behind his eyes. Memories of Tyler's death came like unwelcome phantoms. Tyler calling out, the explosion hitting too fast, Ethan arriving just one step too late. The guilt still punched breath from his lungs when he let his guard down. Ranger approached him then, pressing his head gently against Ethan's thigh, a quiet reassurance or a plea to listen. Ethan knelt and brushed a hand through Ranger's thick fur. "All right," he murmured. "We'll check again tomorrow. Whatever's wrong, we'll figure it out." He didn't know then just how literal those words would become, nor did he know that Ranger's instincts were already hearing something buried beneath frost and soil, something human, something faint, something fighting not to be forgotten. In the icy stillness outside, snow continued to fall, covering secrets that would not stay hidden much longer. The metallic groan of the lid echoed into the frozen air as Ethan forced it fully aside, his breath clouding in front of him while a surge of hot, fetid air rose from the dark pit like the exhale of something wounded. His pulse hammered against his ribs, the instinctive rhythm of a man who had sprinted across battlefields and breached hostile compounds, yet had never expected to fight a war in a quiet Denver backyard. Ranger stood above the opening, body taut, amber eyes locked on the two small figures curled within the cramped space below. The snow around them glowed faintly from the porch light, but inside the hole it was almost pitch black, save for the trembling movement of two tiny hands clutching each other. Ethan crouched, lowering himself until he could see clearly. The sight struck him harder than any impact he'd ever taken. Two girls, both painfully thin, maybe 7 years old, mirrored each other in their frailty. Their faces were tight masks of fear and starvation, their skin grayish from cold and lack of sunlight. The girl closest to him, Emma, he would later learn, had wild, dark brown hair matted against her cheeks, and her large eyes were impossibly hollow. She blinked up at him with the expression of someone who no longer believed rescue was real. The other girl, Lily, lay partially covered by a filthy scrap of blanket. Her hair was a lighter brown, falling in tangled waves, her eyelids barely open. She looked more like a faded watercolor of a child than an actual living one. Ethan swallowed hard, anger and disbelief rising like a storm inside him. He had seen wounded civilians overseas, children rescued from hostile zones, but nothing compared to the brutal intimacy of this. This was not war. This was a suburb with Christmas lights still wrapped around gutters. This was a neighborhood where people waved politely while carrying groceries. This was horror disguised as domestic quiet. Ranger, understanding the fragility before them, descended into the pit with graceful caution. Despite his weight, he placed each paw with meticulous care. He curled himself beside Lily, pressing his warm body against her tiny frame. Emma let out a cracked gasp, her lips trembling as she touched the dog's fur, testing if he was real. He nuzzled her wrist gently, offering warmth, offering safety, offering something she had forgotten existed: kindness. Ethan lowered himself further, his boots sinking into the softened earth as he stepped into the pit. The heat and stink enveloped him instantly. Sour sweat, ammonia, soil soaked with fear. Lily's breathing hitched, shallow and rapid. Emma's thin arms wrapped more tightly around her sister as if expecting punishment rather than rescue. "Hey," Ethan said softly, a voice he barely recognized, gentler than his usual clipped military tone. "I'm here. You're safe now." Emma stared at him, lips parted. She didn't answer. She only tightened her grip on Lily, whose eyelids fluttered weakly. Ethan gently reached out. "I'm going to help her," he whispered. "I'm going to help both of you." As he touched Lily's wrist to check for a pulse, a faint sound tore across the yard. A scream. Veronica. She burst from her back door like a breaking wave, her hair wild now, no longer sleek and arranged. In the harsh porch light, her face appeared distorted, rage twisting her delicate features into something sharp and predatory. "Get away from there!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw fury. "Get away from them! They're lying, those filthy little liars!" Ethan stood upright in the hole, shielding the girls instinctively with his body. He had looked into the eyes of suicide bombers, cartel soldiers, and pirates with assault rifles, but the venom in Veronica's eyes made his blood turn cold. "What did you do?" Ethan's voice was quiet, but beneath its surface was steel. Veronica stumbled forward through the snow. She was barefoot, wearing only leggings and a thin sweater despite the freezing temperature, her skin blanching under the cold. She looked unhinged, panic tearing away her carefully built mask. "They were loud!" she screamed, jabbing a finger at the girls. "They were wicked! They needed discipline! They—" "Stop!" Ethan said sharply. "Don't take another step." She froze, eyes burning. Then another voice called out from the back porch. Daniel, the husband. He stepped into the light wearing a thin flannel shirt, his hair mussed, his face drained of its already weak color. His posture sagged further when he saw Ethan standing in the open pit. "Veronica, what did you do?" he whispered. His voice shook like brittle glass. Veronica spun toward him, eyes wild. "You told me to handle it. You said you couldn't deal with them anymore. You said—" "I never—" Daniel's words collapsed into silence as he stared down at the hole. For a brief second, Ethan saw something flicker in the man's eyes, guilt, shock, cowardice merging into one heavy weight. It didn't matter now. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket with one hand while supporting Lily with the other. 911, he said firmly, staring at Daniel. "Now." The man fumbled for his own phone, shaking so terribly that he almost dropped it twice before beginning the call. Veronica lunged toward the pit, but Ranger was instantly on his feet, teeth bared in a silent warning. The low rumble vibrating in his chest froze her mid-step. She stared at the dog with unfiltered hatred. "He's mine!" she screamed. "They're mine!" Ethan's jaw tightened. Not anymore. Minutes stretched like hours until the sound of sirens broke through the frozen night. Blue and red lights painted the snow, and officers sprinted into the yard. Among them was Officer Maureen Baxter, a stocky woman in her early 40s with warm brown skin, a deep-set jaw, and tightly coiled black hair tied under her beanie. She moved with the steady confidence of someone who had lived her life in command. Broad shoulders, firm eyes, and the no-nonsense aura of a mother who had wrangled both children and criminals. "Cole," Baxter said, breath fogging the air. She had met Ethan months before during a neighborhood patrol call. She knew enough about him to recognize when he looked ready to collapse or ready to fight. This time, he looked like both. "2 victims," Ethan said, lifting Lily carefully. "Severe malnutrition, possible hypothermia. 1 unconscious, 1 minimally responsive." Baxter radioed for EMS immediately, her tone clipped, efficient. She then looked toward Veronica, whose chest was heaving, eyes darting around wildly. 2 younger officers moved in, both cautious. Veronica's entire posture screamed danger. "Ma'am," Baxter said calmly, "I need you to step back and keep your hands visible." "You don't understand," Veronica cried. "They ruined everything." "Hands up," Baxter repeated firmly. As Veronica was restrained, Daniel folded into himself beside the house, sinking into the snow as though his bones had given up. Ethan ignored them both and focused entirely on the small bodies in his arms. When the paramedics arrived, one of them, a tall man in his 50s named Harold Whitman, knelt beside Ethan. Harold had a rugged face with deep-set creases around his mouth and a silver beard trimmed close. His dark blue eyes were steady, softened by years of helping people survive their worst moments. "Easy," Harold murmured as he checked Lily's pulse. "You did good getting them out this fast." His partner, a young paramedic named Jess Rourke, with short auburn hair and freckles dotted across her pale face, wrapped a thermal blanket around Emma. Jess had a calm, empathetic softness to her manner, moving slowly so as not to startle the frightened child. Ethan stepped back only when both girls were secured on stretchers. As the ambulance door shut, Ethan pressed a hand on Ranger's head. The dog leaned into him, warm and solid. The war inside Ethan's mind stilled, replaced by something else. Purpose, fierce and sudden. The last thing he saw that night was the trail of ambulance lights disappearing into the snowy Denver streets, carrying 2 children who still clung to life. The fluorescent lights of Denver Children's Hospital cast a pale, almost clinical glow along the sterile hallway as Ethan Cole followed the stretcher-bearing Lily into the trauma wing. The cold outside had been a physical sting, but this cold, this hospital cold, was spiritual. It crawled beneath his skin, made the air feel carved from glass. Ranger walked at his side with a quiet determination, his large paws tapping softly against the polished floor, ears flicking at every sound. Nurses hesitated at first. Ranger was a powerful German shepherd with the aura of a trained soldier, but when Ethan's hand rested gently on the dog's neck, it was enough. Ranger's obedience and steady presence softened their worry. A nurse briskly stepped forward to guide Ethan to the waiting area. She introduced herself as Nurse Hannah Ruiz, a woman in her early 30s with warm tan skin, wavy chestnut hair braided loosely over her shoulder, and dark expressive eyes that seemed to absorb emotion rather than deflect it. Her build was petite but strong, and her movements carried the confident rhythm of someone who had fought hard to build a life in medicine. "We'll do everything we can," Hannah said, her expression grave yet compassionate. "They're incredibly malnourished. Hypothermia is severe, but they're fighters, especially the older one. She held on to her sister the entire time." Ethan glanced toward Emma, who was now being taken to a separate evaluation room. She was on her stretcher, small hands gripping the thin blanket as if the world might vanish without something to hold. Her wide black eyes followed every motion Ranger made, clinging to the dog like he was the last shape she trusted. Ethan squeezed Ranger's shoulder. "Stay close," he whispered. Ranger sat beside Emma's stretcher, tail still, presence firm. The paramedics who had brought the girls, Harold Whitman and Jess Rourke, stood in the hallway giving updates to the attending physician. Another doctor joined them, a tall man in his late 40s named Dr. Miles Norwood. He wore wire-rimmed glasses perched low on a narrow, angular nose and had salt-and-pepper hair clipped short. His face was gaunt, sharply lined, the face of someone who rarely slept as much as he demanded others do. Beneath his professionalism lay a lingering burden, a rumor whispered among hospital staff of a young niece he once failed to save years ago during an undiagnosed infection. Since then, his reputation was built upon a relentless, almost obsessive commitment to rescuing every child who crossed his path. Dr. Norwood approached Ethan. "You're the one who found them?" His voice was steady but edged with urgency. Ethan nodded. "Yes." "Then stay available," Norwood said, flipping through Lily's initial vitals. "Situations like this, CPS will want statements. Police, too. But right now, our priority is stabilizing these girls." Ethan swallowed, feeling the weight of helplessness settle like ice in his lungs. "What are their chances?" Dr. Norwood paused, slipping his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "For the younger girl, Emma, her vitals are weak but responsive. Severe dehydration, bruising, but she's conscious. Lily, her core temperature is dangerously low, her blood pressure is unstable. We're combing her for fractures. She's fighting, but she's exhausted." The words wrapped around Ethan's chest like a tightening rope. Ranger let out a soft whine, sensing Ethan's tension. A door opened down the hall. A woman stepped out, a CPS agent. Teresa Langford, early 40s with shoulder-length blonde hair kept in a neat, functional bob and a slender build wrapped in a navy business jacket. Her skin was pale from long hours indoors, and her gray eyes observed everything with clinical detachment. She had the professional demeanor of someone who had spent too much time navigating the broken edges of human families. Polite, distant, carrying an emotional shield that had thickened over the years. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. "I'm with Child Protective Services. I'll need a statement from you as soon as the girls are stabilized." Ethan nodded. "Anything you need." Teresa inhaled slowly, arms folded tight against her clipboard. "Cases like this, they don't end cleanly. We already interviewed the father, Daniel Raymond. Claims ignorance. Claims he traveled constantly. But his daughters were starving beneath his own backyard. It's hard not to see willful neglect." "What happens to them now?" Ethan asked, voice low. "They go into emergency protective custody," Teresa replied. "We'll place them with the first available foster home." She hesitated. "Though, 2 girls, bonded twins, severely traumatized. It's unlikely we'll find a home that can take both immediately. They may have to be placed separately for their own safety and immediate care." Ethan stiffened. Ranger's ears flicked upward sharply as if sensing the shift in Ethan's breathing. "Separated?" Ethan stepped closer, his expression tightening. Teresa nodded gently, though her eyes remained professionally distant. "It's not ideal, but most homes aren't equipped to handle 2 severely traumatized minors simultaneously, especially when one may require long-term, in-facility care." Ethan looked past her toward the hospital doors, feeling the cold memory of Tyler's death echo through him again. The crushing sense of being too late, failing someone who needed him. But these children weren't soldiers. They were barely even alive. "They just survived hell together," Ethan said, voice roughening. "And you want to rip them apart the moment they breathe fresh air?" Teresa sighed. She didn't argue, perhaps because she'd heard similar protests before. Ranger rose from his sitting position and pressed his head against Ethan's leg, grounding him. Just then, a new figure arrived, a police officer stepping through the sliding glass doors. Detective Karen Holt, mid-50s, was built like someone carved from solid oak. She had cropped silver hair, a deep tan earned from years spent outdoors, and sharp brown eyes that seemed to read a person's motives before they even spoke. Her badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, brushing against a thick winter coat. Her presence radiated seasoned authority, the kind earned through decades of homicide and child crimes investigations. "Cole," she greeted, voice gravelly from too much coffee and too little rest. She had met Ethan once briefly during a veteran charity event. She respected him then, but now she studied him with renewed interest. "Paramedics say you found them." "Ranger found them," Ethan said, running a hand along the dog's back. "I just followed." Holt nodded deeply, seriousness tightening her jawline. "We've got Veronica Raymond in custody. Screamed the whole ride to the station, already claiming the kids made her do it. The husband's a mess. We're charging him with criminal neglect pending investigation." Then her tone softened an inch. "Those girls owe you their lives." Ethan looked away, jaw clenching. "I was almost too late." Holt's voice steadied. "Almost doesn't matter. They're alive." Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Norwood reemerged from the trauma room. His expression remained stern, but something in his posture eased. Just a fraction. "Lily is stabilized for now. She's not out of danger, but she's responding to rewarming treatments. Emma is asking for the dog." Ethan exhaled shakily, unaware he'd been holding his breath. Ranger immediately trotted toward the trauma room, tail low but eager, gentle. The nurses let him in with only a brief exchange of glances. They had never seen a dog's presence calm a child so quickly. Ethan followed and found Emma sitting upright in the hospital bed, wrapped in blankets that seemed too large for her tiny frame. Her eyes, once hollow pits of fear, brightened just slightly when Ranger nudged his head beneath her hand. She whispered something, too soft for anyone but the dog to hear, and laid her cheek against his fur. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the moment imprint itself on both of them. For the first time that night, he felt the faintest spark of warmth in his frozen chest. Not hope. He wasn't ready for that. But purpose. A direction. A reason not to walk away. In the corner of the room, Lily lay unconscious beneath a web of wires and monitors, her breath shallow but present. Ethan stepped closer, gently touched the rail of her bed, and made a silent vow. Whatever happened next, CPS, courts, hospitals, he would not let these girls disappear into the cracks of a broken system. They had survived Veronica. They deserved to survive everything else too. Snow whispered against the windows that night, a soft, steady rhythm like distant waves, gentler than the oceans Ethan Cole once knew, but cold enough to remind him that winter here in Denver did not forgive easily. His house, once a quiet outpost where he kept his grief locked behind disciplined routine, was now filled with the timid rustling of two small lives trying to relearn how to exist. The living room lamp cast a warm, amber glow across the wooden floor as Emma and Lily sat on the rug, both wrapped in oversized sweaters Ethan had bought in a hurried, uncertain shopping trip. The wool hung loose on their thin frames, making them appear smaller, like young saplings struggling to hold their shape after years of harsh wind. Ranger lay between them, his long body perfectly still except for the subtle rise and fall of his breath. His fur, aged with faint streaks of gray, caught the warm light like smoke drifting through shadow. He was 7 years old, muscled yet gentle, a working dog turned guardian whose amber eyes reflected everything he understood but could not voice. Emma kept one hand buried in his fur. Lily, small and ghost-like, leaned her shoulder against Ranger's flank as though anchoring herself to something real. Ethan watched them from the kitchen doorway, clutching the handle of a saucepan like it was unfamiliar weaponry. The steam from the hot cocoa curled into the air, sweet and warm, yet his hands trembled slightly. He wasn't afraid of combat, or blood, or icy nights spent waiting for a target to break cover, but this, 2 children who froze at the sound of footsteps, was a battleground with rules he had never learned. "Hot cocoa's ready," he said softly. His voice, once commanding and sharp, now felt like it was wrapped in cotton. Emma flinched anyway. The movement was small, a twitch of shoulders, a tightening of her back. Lily didn't move. She simply pressed closer to Ranger, letting his warmth swallow her fear. Ethan placed the mugs on the low table and sat on the floor rather than in a chair, lowering himself to their level. The psychologist at CPS had suggested that, avoid towering postures. He had almost laughed. In the SEALs, towering was the point. Now he made himself small. Emma crept forward cautiously. Her long, dark hair, still uneven from the hospital staff trimming away knots and grime, fell across her face. She brushed it back with thin fingers. Her skin was pale, dotted with faint bruises hidden beneath the sweater's cuffs. Lily remained where she was. Ethan didn't push her. He slid one mug toward Ranger, letting the scent drift. Emma took a sip so fast she burned her tongue and pulled back with a startled gasp. Ethan instinctively reached forward, but the moment she saw his hand move quickly, she recoiled. Ranger stood immediately, not rising, but shifting just enough to place his head beneath Emma's hand again. She calmed instantly, breath shaky but steadying against his fur. Ethan felt the sting in his chest, a tightness that surprised him still. He lowered his hand slowly. "It's okay," he said. "It's yours. No one's taking it." She nodded, but her eyes didn't fully trust the words yet. Lily's small voice emerged suddenly, barely audible. Does he always stay with us?" Ethan turned. Lily rarely spoke, and when she did, it came like delicate cracks in thick ice. "Ranger?" he asked gently. She nodded. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah. He stays wherever he's needed." Ranger looked up at him then, and the look almost felt like agreement. The evening trickled into quiet moments. Ethan read paperwork at the table, endless CPS forms, background checks, home inspections, psychological evaluations. Every page was a reminder of the system's distrust. A single man, a former SEAL with combat trauma, a dangerous profession, too quiet, too lonely, too unpredictable. Yet, every page also felt like a mission briefing, and Ethan had never failed a mission he committed to. The next morning brought the first home visit from CPS. Teresa Langford arrived at dawn, knocking with her knuckles sharp and clipped against the door. She stepped inside with her usual professional detachment, wearing the same navy jacket, clipboard in hand. Ethan noticed she wore no wedding ring. Perhaps marriage had been sacrificed to her job, perhaps by choice. Her eyes swept the room, assessing every detail. "House is clean," she noted. "Organized." Ethan nodded. "I try." Emma and Lily sat on the couch, Ranger lying on the floor before them like a guarding wall. Teresa crouched briefly, offering a small smile that softened her cold efficiency. "Hi, girls. My name is Teresa. Remember me?" Emma nodded shyly. Lily hid behind Ranger's shoulder. Teresa shifted her weight, voice warm but practiced. "How are you feeling today?" Emma whispered. "Warm." "Good," Teresa said. "Warm is good." She stood again and addressed Ethan. "We'll need to review daily routines, meals, sleep schedules, emotional responses, any incidents at night." Ethan stiffened, recalling Emma's nighttime panic attacks, the self-hitting, the breathless apologies, the trembling. He hadn't slept. He had stayed with them until their chests rose in steady rhythm again. "There were some episodes," he admitted quietly. "I handled them." Teresa wrote something. Ethan hated that sound. The scrape of the pen, the implied judgment. "I'll also need to review your support network," she continued. "Neighbors, friends, colleagues, anyone who could help in emergencies." Ethan's eyes lowered. "I don't have much family." Teresa looked at him. "Anyone you trust?" Ethan hesitated. Faces flickered in memory. Old teammates, men who died beside him, men he couldn't save. "There's someone," he said after a pause. "A friend. Retired SEAL." As if summoned by name, the doorbell rang. Ranger jumped to his feet, but didn't bark. Ethan answered the door to find Captain Mark Ridley, his former commanding officer standing tall and broad-shouldered in the snow. Mark was in his early 40s with rugged features carved by sun and combat. Square jaw, peppered beard trimmed neatly, scar slicing down his right eyebrow from an explosion in Ramadi. He wore a worn, military-style jacket over a flannel shirt, dark jeans, boots dusted with snow. His presence radiated calm authority, but beneath his tough exterior lay a man hollowed by the death of his own younger brother years ago, a wound that had shaped his protective nature. "Heard you needed backup," Mark said with a half-smile, clapping Ethan's shoulder. Ethan smirked. "You always show up uninvited." "Only when you're about to screw something up," Mark replied. Teresa observed the interaction with interest, checking off a box on her clipboard. "This is good," she said. "A reliable adult connection. Someone who knows your history." Mark stepped inside and immediately softened at the sight of the girls. His voice, gravelly but warm, lowered instinctively. "Hey there, I'm Mark." Emma stared at him, clutching Ranger's tail. Lily peeked from behind the dog. Mark didn't push, just sat on the floor, letting his tall frame fold patiently. "Your dog's got better situational awareness than half my platoon," he joked quietly. Ethan cracked a smile. Teresa studied the room again, slower this time, her expression shifting subtly as if she were beginning to see not a risk but a family forming from broken pieces. She closed her clipboard. "Ethan, you're doing better than expected. I'll schedule the next evaluation within the week." As she stepped out into the cold, Ethan exhaled. The door shut. Ranger returned to the girls. Emma rested her face against his fur. Lily slipped her hand into Ethan's without looking at him. He froze for a moment, then gently closed his fingers around hers. In that small, human gesture, something shifted. The house was no longer silent. Winter was no longer empty. 3 survivors, 2 children and 1 soldier, were beginning, tentatively, to thaw. Winter settled in deeper, laying itself over Denver like a heavy gray blanket that refused to be shaken off. Days shrank into thin strips of pale light, and nights stretched long and quiet, broken only by the occasional car passing and the soft sigh of the heating system cycling on. Inside Ethan Cole's small house, warmth glowed from lamps and the fireplace, but it hadn't yet seeped all the way into the hearts of the people who lived there. Healing, he was discovering, moved slower than winter. By day, the change was almost visible. Emma began to shadow Ethan around the house, still wary, still flinching at sudden sounds, but more present than before. She would stand near the kitchen doorway and watch him cook, those dark, bruised eyes tracking the way he stirred soup or buttered toast as if it were some kind of strange magic. Lily gravitated to quieter corners. The spot under the living room window where the light pooled, the armchair where she could curl up with a blanket, always with Ranger somewhere within arm's reach. She was slight and pale, her brown hair falling in soft waves now that the knots had been combed out. When she did speak, which was rare, her voice was soft and controlled, as if every word had to be checked for danger before being released. Ranger took his new mission with the steady seriousness of a seasoned soldier. He divided his time with uncanny precision. Part of the day lying nearby while Ethan worked through mountains of CPS paperwork, part of it stationed beside the girls as they watched cartoons or drew tentative shapes on scrap paper. He seemed to know when the air in the room started to tighten, when Emma's shoulders tensed or Lily's breathing sped up. At those moments he would shift his weight, press his warm body a little closer, bump a hand with his nose until small fingers tangled in his fur. He had been trained to detect explosives and contraband. Now he detected fear, and he alerted the only way he knew how, by staying. Nights were another battlefield. The first week, both girls insisted on sharing a room. Ethan moved furniture, carefully setting up 2 beds along the walls, leaving space in the middle for Ranger to sleep. He chose soft nightlights instead of darkness or harsh overhead lamps. He swapped the door's sharp click for a slow, silent close. Tactics, he told himself. Just tactics. Plan your environment so the enemy, fear in this case, has fewer places to hide. It worked, until it didn't. Some nights Lily would toss and whimper, hands clutching the blankets as if they might disappear. But it was Emma who carried the worst storms. The first full episode hit in the dead of night, around 2 in the morning, when the house was so quiet Ethan could hear the faint tick of contracting wood in the walls. He woke to a sound he had never heard in his own house before, a small, strangled sob that wasn't fully released, like a cry being dragged backward. Adrenaline spiked so hard in his veins that for one split second he thought he was back on deployment, that the sound was a choked radio call or someone whispering his name across a dark ocean. Then he heard it again. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The words were muffled, desperate. Ethan threw on a t-shirt and moved down the hall, feet silent, Ranger already slipping past his knees, drawn by the same invisible thread. The girl's door was ajar. He pushed it open gently. The moonlight spilled in through the thin curtains, painting everything in shades of blue and silver. Emma sat upright in bed, knees pulled tight to her chest, hair wild around her face. Her breathing came in quick, ragged gasps. She wasn't seeing the room. She was somewhere else entirely. Her fists slammed into the sides of her head, small knuckles thudding against her temples with more force than Ethan would have believed she possessed. "I'm sorry. I'll be quiet. I'll be good. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Her voice shook with panic, the words tumbling out on top of each other like they were trying to outrun a punishment. Lily was awake in the other bed, eyes wide in the pale light. She had pulled her knees up too, but she was frozen, as if she'd been glued in place by the weight of too many memories. Ethan's chest clenched. He had seen men hit themselves before, soldiers knocked half senseless by explosions, slamming fists into their helmets, trying to wake themselves up. But this wasn't shock. This was conditioning. This was obedience etched into bone. "Emma," he said softly, approaching the bed with hands raised. Hey. It's Ethan. You're safe. You're in my house. No one's going to hurt you." She only flinched harder. The moment he neared, she recoiled as if expecting hands to grab her and hold her down. One of her fists slipped free and smashed against her cheek. Ethan felt something crack inside him. It was that same helplessness he'd felt when Tyler bled out in his arms, except now the enemy was invisible, living only in the girl's mind. He reached out on instinct, trying to catch her wrists gently, to stop her from hurting herself. The result was immediate and devastating. Emma shrieked, a small, broken sound, and thrashed, kicking out, eyes wild. "No! I'll be good, please!" The words stabbed their way through Ethan's composure. Every training he'd ever had was suddenly useless. He loosened his grip at once and backed off a step, heart pounding. "Okay," he murmured. "Okay, I'm not going to hold you. I'm sorry. I'm right here. I'm not touching you. You're safe." He stood there, hands shaking, watching the girl punch herself in the head, each blow a terrifying echo of what had been done to her, and for the first time since leaving the Navy, Ethan felt truly powerless. Ranger moved. There was no command, no gesture. The dog sprang lightly onto the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip. Emma's fists were already mid-swing. Ranger slid his body between her and the path of her blows, pressing his chest against hers, pinning her gently to the mattress the way a heavy blanket would. Her fists landed against his thick skull and shoulders. He absorbed each hit without complaint, head tilted so his eyes stayed on hers. Steady, warm, unafraid. A low, throaty whine vibrated from him, soft and continuous. Not a sound of pain, but of reassurance. He licked a tear that had escaped down Emma's cheek, then another, his rough tongue replacing the sting with something warm and startlingly alive. Emma's punches faltered. Confusion flickered through her terror. Every time she tried to hit herself, her fists sank into fur instead of bone. She blinked, breath still ragged, but the mantra of "I'm sorry" broke, scattered. The room was filled instead with muffled sobs. Lily watched from her bed, eyes luminous in the moonlight. Her small hands clutched her blanket so tightly her knuckles blanched. She had watched her sister take the blows for both of them for so long that her muscles seemed to remember the posture even when she stayed still. Ethan sat down slowly on the edge of Emma's bed, careful not to crowd. He rested one hand on Ranger's back, feeling the dog's heartbeat thrum in a counterpoint to the girl's shuddering breaths. "You're safe," he said again, voice low. "You don't have to do that anymore. No one's coming. No one's mad at you." Emma finally looked at him. Her gaze was blurred, as if she were staring through several layers of time. Then she buried her face in Ranger's neck, her body shaking with broken sobs, the deep kind, the ones that come up from where the body has stored them for years. On the other side of the room, a sound broke the air, a whisper, but clear. "Emma, don't." Ethan turned his head. Lily had scooted to the edge of her bed, feet not quite touching the floor. Her shoulders trembled, but her voice, soft and thin, carried through the dark like a small, brave bell. "Please," she said, more firmly this time, "don't hit." She wasn't just talking to her sister. She was speaking to the past, to the woman who had turned apologies into survival strategies. She was, in her own way, disobeying the rules that had nearly killed them. Emma's crying hitched. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see her twin. In that moment, something shifted in the room, like a door opening or a chain unhooking. Ranger stayed pressed against her, a living barrier between her fists and her own skin. Ethan looked from one girl to the other and felt his throat tighten. He had heard gunfire, explosions, men screaming orders and prayers and curses, but he had never heard anything as powerful as that small plea. Don't hit. The house fell into a new kind of silence. Not the old, empty silence of a widower and his dog, but the fragile quiet that comes after a storm, when survivors are counting the cost and realizing they are still here. In that thin, silver moonlight, 3 wounded souls, a soldier who had lost his brother in arms, a girl taught to carry all the punishment, and another taught to vanish into the background, sat together on a creaking mattress, bound by the warmth of one steadfast dog who refused to move. For the first time, the night did not feel endless. It felt like a beginning. The courthouse stood against the early spring sky like a stern monument carved from old stone, its tall columns streaked with the residue of melting snow. The air outside still carried the sharp bite of winter, but patches of thawing pavement glistened where the sun had begun its slow reclaiming of the season. Ethan Cole walked up the courthouse steps with Emma on his left, Lily on his right, and Ranger pacing between them, his gait steady and confident. It had taken months to get here, months of paperwork, home inspections, therapy appointments, CPS follow-ups, and hearings to determine parental responsibility. Months of sleepless nights, quiet victories, and halting progress. But now, as Ethan tightened his grip on the girl's small hands, he felt the weight of something else, the edge of permanence. The courtroom was quiet when they entered. The lighting was soft, the polished wood panels reflecting only muted shades. This was not one of the crowded, chaotic courtrooms reserved for public trials. This was a smaller chamber, private, designed for matters of custody, protection, and the fragile rebuilding of families. At the judge's bench sat Judge Eleanor Whitford, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair tied in a low twist at the nape of her neck. Deep lines framed her mouth, but they were softened by warmth rather than hardened by severity. Her skin was pale and lightly freckled, and her glasses hung on a thin chain of delicate gold. She had the demeanor of someone who had presided over countless heartbreaks yet refused to lose her capacity for compassion. Every motion she made was slow, deliberate, the kind of calm that only came from decades of staring down chaos and choosing to remain human. To her right sat the court clerk, Mr. Alan Pierce, a thin man in his 50s with sandy hair thinning at the crown and a pair of rectangular glasses perched precariously on his narrow nose. He was meticulous, his movements precise, each paper neatly aligned with the next. Behind the clerk, a bailiff stood post. Officer Gerald Knox, tall and broad-shouldered, had a beard shaved down to rough stubble and dark brown skin that contrasted with his crisp uniform. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that came from serving in the military before joining the sheriff's department. He had a habit of tapping two fingers lightly against his belt when thinking, a subtle tic from old training routines. On the opposite bench sat Veronica Raymond, flanked by her attorney. Veronica's once carefully cultivated beauty had faded under the fluorescent lights and months in county jail. Her blonde hair hung limp around her face, her skin sallow, her frame more brittle than sharp. Her eyes retained their familiar cold fire, but now the flames flickered with a volatile mix of denial and rage. Daniel Raymond sat farther down, shoulders slumped forward, hands clasped so tight his knuckles whitened. He looked smaller than Ethan remembered, a man, hollowed out by guilt and the ruins of choices too long ignored. Judge Whitford adjusted her glasses and addressed the room. "We are here today to finalize the proceedings regarding custody and parental rights for minors Emma and Lily Raymond." The clerk read the summary of the case. The discovery of the girls in the outdoor cellar, the full medical reports, the psychological assessments, Ranger's critical role in finding them, and the ongoing stability provided by Ethan's home. The room felt colder as the details resurfaced, but Ethan kept his eyes forward, his hands steady on the girls' shoulders. When it came time for witness statements, Teresa Langford, the CPS agent who had followed their case from the beginning, stepped forward. Her navy blazer was immaculate, her blonde hair neatly tucked behind her ears. She spoke clearly and calmly. "Mr. Cole has demonstrated exceptional care for the children," she began. "His home provides safety, structure, and emotional stability. He has complied with every requirement: background checks, home evaluations, therapy sessions, and supervised visits. The girls have formed a secure attachment to him and to his service dog, Ranger. In matters concerning the best interests of the children, I strongly recommend the termination of the biological parents' rights and the approval of Mr. Cole's adoption request." Veronica scoffed loudly, muttering an insult under her breath. The bailiff's stern glance silenced her. Then Judge Whitford directed her attention to Ethan. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice softened yet solemn, "do you understand what adoption entails? This is not temporary guardianship. This is not a mission or assignment with an endpoint. This is a lifelong commitment." Ethan stood. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice did not waver. "I understand." "And are you willing," she continued, "to provide emotional, physical, and financial support to these children for as long as you live?" Ethan placed a gentle hand on Emma's back and another on Lily's. "I already do," he said. "I'm just asking for the law to recognize it." Judge Whitford nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Very well." She motioned toward the girls. "Emma, Lily, would you like to share anything before I make my ruling?" Emma slid forward in her seat, small hands clenched together. Her voice was timid but clear. "I want to stay with him," she said, glancing up at Ethan. "He makes cocoa too sweet, but he's learning. And he doesn't get mad when we drop stuff, and Ranger sleeps with us when we're scared." Lily didn't speak at first. She simply looked at Ranger, then at Ethan, then at the judge. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. But in the quiet courtroom, it was louder than any words. Judge Whitford folded her hands. She took a long, measured breath. "In that case, it is the ruling of this court that Ethan Cole is hereby granted full adoptive custody of Emma and Lily Raymond. The parental rights of Veronica and Daniel Raymond are terminated effective immediately." The hammer of the gavel struck once, sharp, final, echoing. Something warm burst quietly in Ethan's chest. Emma gasped and clutched his sleeve. Lily leaned into his side. Ranger wagged his tail once, a controlled but unmistakably joyful thump against the floor. The courtroom, once suffocating with tension, seemed to fill with a gentle warmth that felt almost like sunlight. Months passed. Winter melted fully into spring, then into the early hints of next year's snow. On a cold December afternoon, a fresh layer of white blanketed the yard of Ethan's house. Two small figures darted across the lawn, bundled in thick jackets, hats too big for their heads. Emma held a toy walkie-talkie. Lily carried a plastic flashlight. "Sector 3 is clear," Emma shouted with gleeful determination. "Ranger, search!" Ranger bounded through the snow, nose down, tail up, playing the part of a patrol dog with disciplined enthusiasm. He nosed around a mound of snow, then barked once, tail wagging. The girls screamed with laughter and declared it the hiding spot of an imaginary villain. Ethan sat on the front steps, a steaming mug of coffee between his hands. His breath mingled with the cold air, rising in thin spirals. He watched them, two bright sparks running against the white canvas of winter, one steadfast dog tracking their chatter, and his own heart, no longer hollow, beating in a rhythm he had not felt since long before Tyler died. He sipped his coffee and smiled softly. The pain of the past had not vanished. It probably never would. But today it had been rewritten, not erased but reshaped, into something worth carrying. His mission was no longer survival. It was protection, growth. A quiet kind of love learned not from the battlefield, but from two small girls who had shown him that even the harshest winters eventually thaw. Somewhere beneath that fresh layer of snow, the footprints from the night they were found still lay preserved under the cold earth. A reminder of where their story began, and of the dog who refused to stay by the fire when two children needed him in the dark. In the end, their story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or angels in bright robes. Sometimes they come on four paws, wrapped in quiet loyalty, guided by a God who sees the smallest trembling hands and sends help in the most unexpected forms. In a world where pain can grow like winter shadows, healing often begins with simple acts of love. Opening a door, offering warmth, choosing kindness again and again until broken hearts remember how to beat without fear. Let this story be a reminder that God still works through ordinary people and everyday moments, shaping hope out of places once buried in darkness. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs light today. Leave a comment to keep the message alive, and subscribe to the channel so these stories of faith, courage, and second chances can continue to reach those walking through their own winters. May God bless you, protect your home, and place His gentle hand over every child, every family, and on every soul searching for a miracle of their own.